I remember the day the black pumpkin entered my life. It began with a memory I wish I could erase, a flicker of something dark settling behind my ribs. Back then, the fields behind my house were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes even wind seem nervous. I used to walk there alone, tracing the uneven soil and the smell of earth that clung to my clothes. That morning, the sky was dull and heavy, pressing down on everything like a warning. I found the pumpkin near the far fence line, half buried, darker than soil, darker than anything natural. I kept thinking it looked wrong, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. When I pulled it free, the weight surprised me. It felt dense, almost swollen with something I didn't understand. I carried it home, telling myself it was nothing more than a strange harvest oddity. But every hour afterward, I felt something shift. The pumpkin's skin grew softer in some places and harder in others. Sometimes I swore I heard faint creaks from inside, like old wood bending under pressure. I tried to ignore it, but ignoring things never makes them disappear. The second night, I woke to a faint thud from the kitchen. Then another. My chest tightened as I approached the counter where I had left it. It hadn't moved, but something about its position felt different, like it had been turning itself when I wasn't there. I started checking on it obsessively. My appetite faded. Sleep slipped away. I felt watched in my own home, as if the dark weight of the pumpkin had settled into the corners of every room. I tried disposing of it. I walked it out to the ditch behind the shed and rolled it into the tall grass. But in the morning, it sat on the kitchen counter again, streaked with dirt and dew. I knew someone had to be messing with me, tracking my habits, breaking in when I slept. The idea made my skin crawl worse than any ghost story. For days I listened carefully, heard faint shuffling outside, footsteps too slow to be a prankster's. My nights became a series of half-breaths. Every creak felt like a countdown. I told myself to get a grip, but fear has a way of hollowing logic until nothing feels safe. One evening, while eating in silence, I noticed the pumpkin had a split forming along one side. A thin line, taut like stretched skin. Something inside was pushing outward. My stomach sank. This wasn't natural. Or maybe it was, and that was the real horror. I set it outside again, far from the house this time, and piled old boards and bricks over it. At midnight I heard a sound like snapping wood. The boards had shifted. Something had moved beneath them. By dawn, the pile was untouched, but the pumpkin was gone. I searched the yard, the field, even the roadside. Nothing. That night I locked every door twice. I sat awake until my eyes stung. When I finally stood to stretch, I saw it. The black shape sat at the far end of the hallway, faintly outlined in the dark. I froze. The air felt colder there, like something breathing without making sound. I didn't move until sunrise. When light filled the hallway, the pumpkin was gone. But muddy footprints led from the hallway to the back door. They were small. Human. No one believes what happened afterward. They say stress makes you imagine things. But I know what I saw the next night when I checked the mirror near the entryway. The muddy footprints were back, and this time they were leading toward me. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. The house felt smaller each hour, the walls tightening around me as if they knew something I didn't. I still remember the exact smell of that morning, the sharp cold mixed with the faint rot of damp leaves. It was the kind of morning where the world feels slightly off, as if something has shifted just a little too far in one direction. I had driven out to my uncle's abandoned farmland to clean the place before it was sold. The property had been empty for years, no animals, no crops, just quiet fields and collapsing sheds. I wasn't expecting anything strange. I was only planning to sweep, patch, and leave before dark, because even in daylight that place carried a heaviness I could never explain. While checking the smaller shed behind the main barn, I noticed something wedged under a rusted wheelbarrow. It looked like a pumpkin at first, but its skin was a deep matte black, as if it had grown without ever seeing sunlight. It wasn't painted. The color was too natural, too even. When I picked it up, the shell felt warm, almost like it had been sitting in someone's hands just seconds earlier. I didn't like the way it felt, but curiosity pushed harder than unease, so I carried it inside. All day the pumpkin sat on the old kitchen table while I worked. Every time I walked past it, I felt the urge to glance back, like something inside it had shifted. I kept telling myself it was just my nerves. The farmhouse had that effect on people. The wallpaper peeled in strips that reminded me of dead skin. The floors creaked in long groans, even when I stood still. The silence inside the house wasn't empty either. It felt thick, like listening through layers of dust. Late in the afternoon, while sweeping the living room, I heard a soft tap behind me. Then another. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut the stillness. When I turned around, the pumpkin had rolled several inches to the left. I didn't watch it move. I only saw where it had ended up. Something tightened across my ribs as I set it back upright and pretended nothing was wrong. I decided I would leave early. The sun was dropping fast, the sky turning the same bruised blue that always made me uncomfortable out there. Before locking up, I checked the kitchen one last time. The pumpkin was gone. The table was empty, dust undisturbed except for the clean ring where it had sat earlier. My stomach tightened. I walked room to room, telling myself I had absent-mindedly moved it somewhere else. But the house was empty. When I stepped outside, I saw it sitting in the open field, perfectly centered between the house and the barn. I don't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to walk toward it. Something about the way it sat there felt wrong, too intentional, too deliberate, like it was waiting for me to approach. The hair on my arms lifted even though the wind was still. I got in my truck and left without locking the door. That night I tried convincing myself I was overthinking everything. Objects roll, people forget things, old houses distort sound. But when I tried to sleep, I kept replaying the image of that pumpkin sitting in the field as if it had placed itself there. Just before finally dozing off, my phone buzzed. There were motion alerts from the small security camera I had mounted earlier at the farmhouse door. I hadn't expected it to record anything yet. The footage showed something moving in front of the house. Not a person. Not clearly. A round dark shape rolling slowly across the porch. The camera glitched, and when it cleared, the pumpkin was sitting upright facing the door. Then the clip ended. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning I drove back, partly out of responsibility, partly out of a need to prove to myself that the camera had malfunctioned. When I arrived, the pumpkin was back on the kitchen table, placed neatly, centered, as if nothing had happened. My pulse hammered so loudly I could feel it in my fingertips. I grabbed it, shoved it into a garbage bag, and tied the bag tight. I wasn't taking chances. I drove half an hour to a dumping ground at the edge of town and tossed it into one of the deeper pits, brushing my hands off like I had rid myself of something contagious. Back at home, I tried to settle into the rest of my day, but I couldn't shake the tension sitting just beneath my skin. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow a little too defined. Around midnight, while brushing my teeth, I heard something roll across the wooden floor outside the bathroom. I froze. There are moments when the body understands danger before the mind catches up. This was one of those moments. I stepped out slowly, heart pounding in my throat. At first I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted. It sat at the end of the hallway. The same black pumpkin. No bag. No dirt. No damage. The same perfect matte skin. I wanted to believe someone had followed me home, broken in, planted it there as some terrible joke. That would have been a relief. But the house was silent. Too silent. I backed into the bedroom and locked the door. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. By dawn, the pumpkin was gone again. A clean spot on the floorboards marked where it had been. I packed a bag, called off work, and drove straight to the farmhouse to finish everything in one day and never return again. But when I began clearing the barn, I found something I had somehow missed before. Multiple black pumpkins. Maybe 15. Maybe 20. All stacked in the far corner, like a collection waiting for someone to choose from. Each one the same size. Each one the same impossible color. Each one facing the barn door, as if they knew I would come back. My breath caught in my throat so sharply it hurt. I didn't approach them. I couldn't. Real fear isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and paralyzing, a cold hand around the spine. I backed out of the barn slowly and climbed into my truck without closing a single door behind me. I drove away. I didn't stop. I didn't think. But as I turned onto the main road, I felt something shift behind my seat. A small thud. A familiar weight rolling gently across the truck bed. I didn't look. I couldn't. Because in the rearview mirror, I already saw the shape. Perfectly round. Perfectly still. And unmistakably black. And when I blinked, I realized it wasn't the only one back there. It was just the one closest to me. The day I found the black pumpkin was the first time I realized how quiet a place can truly become. Not peaceful quiet, something heavier, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. I had driven to the community garden at the edge of town to gather the last of my harvest before winter. The space was usually filled with chatter, distant traffic, and the scrape of tools. That morning, everything felt abandoned. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. My plot was near the back fence, close to the old tool shed that no one used anymore because the floor had rotted through. As I pulled dead vines and checked the soil, I noticed something lodged near the corner of my plot. At first I thought someone had dropped a painted decoration for Halloween, but when I brushed away the dirt and leaves, I saw it wasn't paint at all. It was a pumpkin, roughly the size of a small melon, with skin so dark it looked almost absorbent, as if light vanished on contact. I had never seen a vegetable that color in my life. I picked it up and immediately felt uneasy. The texture wasn't like a normal pumpkin. It felt firm in some spots and strangely soft in others, as if the insides were shifting slowly, like thick liquid adjusting to gravity. I set it aside, telling myself I would leave it for whoever planted it, but each time I looked up, my eyes drifted back to it. Something about it demanded attention. By late morning, I was the only person left in the garden. I finished clearing my area, packed up my tools, and glanced once more at the strange pumpkin. Against my better judgment, I placed it gently in my basket. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing, but in that moment it felt harmless, like bringing home a strange mushroom or oddly shaped potato. When I got home, I set it on the dining table and went on with my chores. At first nothing happened. Hours passed without anything unusual. But by evening, a faint sour smell drifted through the house, subtle but persistent. I followed it to the dining room. The pumpkin sat exactly where I had left it, but a thin crack had formed along the top, narrow but deep enough to reveal a sliver of darker material inside. Something about that crack tightened my chest. I touched the spot near the split and jerked my hand back. It was warm. Not slightly warm, uncomfortably warm, like the heat of skin. My pulse quickened. I backed away, forcing myself not to overreact. Vegetables rot, I reminded myself. They emit heat sometimes. But part of me didn't believe it. Something about that warmth felt too purposeful. I decided I would throw it out the next morning. That night, I kept waking to small, irregular sounds, soft taps, faint drags, the kind of noises that might come from unsettling, but somehow didn't match the usual rhythm of the house. Each time I opened my eyes, my room felt colder. I lay awake listening until dawn, trying to calm my breathing. When I went to the dining room, the pumpkin wasn't on the table anymore. It sat on the floor beneath the window. I stood there in the doorway, my heartbeat loud enough to hear in my ears. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it must have rolled off. But the way it sat perfectly upright, positioned parallel to the wall, made that explanation crumble. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I grabbed gloves, lifted it while keeping my arms locked as far from my body as possible, and carried it outside. I dropped it into the compost bin, shut the lid, and weighted it with a cinder block. The moment I walked away, the unease lifted a little. But that night the sounds came back. Not taps this time. Something heavier. Something deliberate. I stood in the darkness, holding my breath, listening. And then I heard a soft thump from outside, near the compost bin. Another thump. Then silence. I didn't dare look through the window. By morning, dread clawed at my stomach as I approached the bin. The lid was still down, the block still in place. For a moment I felt relief. But when I removed the weight and lifted the lid, the bin was empty. No pumpkin. No residue. Not even a mark. I told myself someone must have come in the night and taken it as a stupid prank, but deep down, I knew no prankster would have cleaned the bin so thoroughly. I stared at the empty space for a long time before finally closing it and locking myself inside the house. That evening, as the sun faded into a dark orange smear, I tried distracting myself with mindless tasks. But the tension in my shoulders wouldn't ease. I jumped at every sound. When the power flickered, my hands shook uncontrollably. The house felt wrong, as if something unseen had settled into the walls. Around midnight, I heard the creaking of floorboards outside my bedroom. Slow, controlled, like someone walking with unusual care. The sound moved down the hallway, pausing near the living room entrance. I sat up, breath caught in my throat, listening to the silence that followed. Then came the roll. Steady, rhythmic, a single object moving across wood. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. The sound stopped outside my door. I waited for the doorknob to turn. It didn't. Instead, a faint tap brushed the base of the door, followed by a gentle, almost curious scrape. My chest tightened so much it hurt. I stayed like that until morning. When light finally crept through the curtains, I gathered the courage to open the door. The hallway was empty. No signs of movement. No marks. But as I stepped into the living room, something in my blood turned to ice. The black pumpkin sat on the coffee table. And it wasn't alone. Next to it was a second one, identical in size and color, both positioned perfectly, facing the hallway as if they had been waiting for me to appear. I backed toward the door slowly, afraid to break eye contact even though they had no eyes. I didn't care about the house, or my belongings, or anything else. I walked out and didn't turn back. Later that afternoon, when I finally convinced myself to return with a friend, the house was silent. Nothing seemed disturbed. But the coffee table held a new object I hadn't noticed before. A third pumpkin, smaller, rounder, and this one had a faint indentation on its surface, a shape unmistakably similar to a fingerprint. My fingerprint. The first time I saw the black pumpkin, I didn't even recognize it as a pumpkin. I thought it was a piece of burned debris, something left behind from the small fire that had swept through the roadside farm a few weeks earlier. I was helping a friend clear out the charred remains of the western field, a stretch of land that had once grown bright orange pumpkins every year. The fire had taken nearly everything. Stalks, crates, even the irrigation lines. Only a few blackened, brittle stems poked out from the earth like broken fingers. While pulling aside a collapsed fence post, something round rolled gently toward my boot. It wasn't burned wood. It wasn't ash. It was a perfectly smooth pumpkin, dark as obsidian from top to bottom, with no scorch marks, no soot, no streaks of gray. It looked untouched, like it had grown that way. The surface was matte, the kind of dark that seemed to swallow every bit of light around it. I bent down to touch it, and the moment my fingertips brushed the skin, a chill ran down my spine. Not the kind of chill you get from cold. A deeper one, like stepping into a room where someone has been silently watching you. The pumpkin felt warm, almost humid, as if it had been growing underground in some strange, insulated soil. I should have left it there. I should have told my friend, or tossed it into the debris pile, or just ignored it completely. But curiosity does strange things to us. I picked it up and carried it to my car without even thinking. By the time I reached home, the air inside my house felt heavy. I placed the pumpkin on the kitchen counter and forgot about it while I showered, but when I stepped back into the kitchen afterward, something felt different. The pumpkin seemed slightly larger. Not by much, maybe an inch. I convinced myself I was imagining it, that the steam from the shower had fogged my perception, but the doubt settled into my stomach like a stone. Over the next 2 hours, I kept glancing at it, each time feeling more unnerved. A strange smell drifted through the room, faint but unpleasant, like damp soil mixed with something metallic. I moved the pumpkin to the back porch, hoping fresh air would clear the scent. That night, the noises started. A soft, slow thudding, not like an animal or a person, more like something heavy shifting its weight. I checked every room, every window, every corner. Nothing. But the thuds continued, irregular and distant, as if coming from beneath the floorboards or from inside the walls. I didn't sleep well. My dreams were distorted, filled with dark shapes rolling slowly toward me, shapes I couldn't escape no matter how fast I ran. The next morning, I found the black pumpkin sitting on the top step of the porch stairs. I froze. I knew I had left it near the railing, far from the edge. It couldn't have rolled. The porch was flat, and the pumpkin had been positioned on a small mat. I checked the security camera I'd mounted outside, an old system with glitchy night vision. The footage showed nothing. The pumpkin simply wasn't there one moment, and then it was. I considered throwing it away, but a strange guilt kept me from doing it. I kept telling myself I needed to understand it first, identify what kind of mutation or disease it might be. I took pictures, researched black vegetables, unusual hybrids, fungal growths. Nothing matched. My stomach tightened the more I searched. On the third day, I tried measuring it. At noon, it measured 8 inches tall. By 5 in the evening, it measured 9.5. By the time I checked before bed, it had reached 10. It was growing, expanding, pulsing slightly, as if something inside was pressing outward. That night was the worst. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound that made my blood turn cold. A slow roll across the living room floor. Not frantic, not chaotic, controlled, deliberate. I stayed completely still, listening, afraid to move even an inch. The rolling stopped near the hallway entrance. For the next hour, there was silence, heavy loaded silence that felt like a breath held too long. When dawn finally arrived, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and looked down the hallway. The black pumpkin sat 3 feet from my bedroom door. The floor beneath it had faint scratches, small arcs carved into the wood, as if something had dragged the pumpkin forward inch by inch. I backed away, shaking so hard I could barely stand. I grabbed thick gloves, scooped it up, and drove it far outside of town, past the river, past the construction site, into the old dumping ground where people abandoned broken appliances and rusted metal. I threw it as far as I could into a pit filled with old tires and scrap, then left without looking back. I thought that would be the end. But at sunset, while hauling trash out to the bin, I saw a familiar round shape sitting next to the mailbox. The black pumpkin. Not dirted, not scratched, not dented from the fall. Perfect. Waiting. I backed into the house, locked every door, and paced until the floorboards creaked under my steps. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't believe in curses or spirits or objects that moved on their own. I still don't. But I believe in people. And I began to realize that maybe someone had been following me since the day I found it. Someone skilled, patient, and deeply disturbed. The next morning, I searched my yard and found footprints behind the shed. Small ones. Precise. Leading straight to the porch. My stomach twisted when I noticed the shape embedded in the muddy soil. Faint toe marks, shallow heel presses. Prints too small for an adult, too steady for a child. I checked all my locks, all my windows. Everything was untouched. But that night, something new happened. I heard breathing. Not from inside my room. From just outside the window. Slow. Heavy. Human. I lay rigid in bed, staring at the ceiling, barely daring to inhale. The breathing lasted for several minutes, then faded. In the morning, I found condensation on the outside of the glass, shaped like a mouth, and the black pumpkin sitting directly beneath the window, positioned perfectly, as if whoever left it wanted me to see it the moment I woke. I decided to set up cameras all around the property. The first night they captured nothing. The second night, nothing again. But on the third night, around 3:18 a.m., one camera recorded movement. A person crouched near my porch. Small, thin, barefoot, holding a black pumpkin in their hands. They placed it on the step, then turned toward the camera. Even though the footage was grainy, the sight of that face made my breath catch. The figure looked like a young boy, maybe 8 or 9. But his expression wasn't confused or playful. It was blank, emotionless, eyes wide open, staring directly into the lens, as if he knew exactly where it was. Then he stepped back into the darkness, disappearing without a sound. I've been awake for days now, watching the footage on loop, trying to understand it, trying to convince myself it was some lost child, or a glitch, or a trick of the camera. But I can't ignore what happened tonight. I checked the porch before coming inside. There were 3 black pumpkins waiting for me, and next to them, pressed into the dust on the step, was a single handprint. Small, perfect, and unmistakably fresh. The thing that still keeps me awake isn't the black pumpkin itself. It's the moment I realized what it had been used for long before I ever found it. That realization is the part my mind keeps circling back to, no matter how much I try to bury the memory under excuses and logic. It started 3 months ago on a cold Sunday morning, when I drove to the edge of the old hiking trail near Hillcrest Quarry. I liked going early before other hikers arrived, before the air warmed and filled with voices. Solitude always steadied me. Silence never bothered me until that day. Halfway up the trail, I stepped off the main path to take a shortcut through a clearing thick with overgrown grass. That's when I kicked something hard hidden under the brush. I expected a rock. Instead, the object rolled forward and settled upright. A pumpkin. Not orange. Not mottled. Not even dark green like the unusual heirloom varieties. It was black. Perfectly, deeply black. The kind of black that makes you feel like you're staring into an old, unlit well. It shouldn't have been there. No farms. No houses. No reason for someone to leave it in a place only serious hikers use. I crouched and picked it up. Its surface was smooth, almost waxy, and warm in a way that made my stomach tighten. I thought maybe it was rotting from inside, creating heat. But the shell was firm. Too firm. I should have left it. But curiosity, stupidity, whatever you want to call it, made me take it home. I kept it in the trunk during the drive, but halfway back my car filled with a faint metallic scent, like dried blood mixed with damp earth. When I checked the trunk, the smell was stronger. The pumpkin looked the same, but the warmth had intensified. I drove the rest of the way with the windows down, telling myself it was plant decay, nothing more. At home, I placed it in the garage and didn't touch it for the rest of the day. But that night, while brushing my teeth, I heard something in the garage. A dull thud, then a second one, timed strangely, as though someone had tapped the concrete floor with their palm. I froze, listened. The sound didn't repeat. In the morning, the pumpkin sat closer to the door than where I remembered leaving it. It wasn't dramatic, just shifted a foot, maybe two. I convinced myself I had forgotten its exact position. Denial can be comforting. 2 days passed. Then things escalated. The metallic smell grew stronger, drifting through the house even though the garage door stayed closed. When I checked the pumpkin again, I noticed a thin crack forming near the top. Not the kind caused by rot. This one looked deliberate, almost like a carving wound starting to reveal whatever hid inside. That night something rolled against the garage door from the inside. Once. Twice. Then silence. I barely slept. On the 4th day, I decided to throw it away. I wrapped it in old towels, loaded it into the back seat, and drove 20 minutes to a public dumpster behind a construction site. I tossed it in, turned around, and told myself that was the end of it. That night, around 1 a.m., a single knock echoed through my living room wall. Not on the door, on the wall. I froze, staring at the dark ceiling. The knock came again, dull, heavy, almost like the weight of something round striking the plaster. My skin prickled with cold fear. I didn't move until dawn. The next morning, on my way to work, I opened the front door and nearly stepped on something. The black pumpkin sat on the welcome mat. Clean. Whole. The crack was gone. That was the moment I accepted someone was doing this. Someone had followed me, found my house, retrieved the pumpkin, and placed it deliberately at my door. I checked every window, every lock, scanned the yard for footprints. Nothing. The fear grew into something sharper, something that hooked into my ribs and refused to let go. I installed cameras. 3 outside, 1 in the garage. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, around 3:07 a.m., the garage camera caught movement. At first it looked like a dark shape sitting on the floor. Then the shape rolled, slow and smooth, until it positioned itself in the center of the frame. The pumpkin. I rewound the footage. 5 seconds earlier the floor was empty. It didn't walk in. Nobody placed it. It simply appeared. My hands went cold. No glitch would have created that perfect of a transition. The footage from the front of the house was worse. Around 3:09 a.m., the camera outside captured something standing near the edge of the porch. A figure. Small. Thin. Barefoot. It didn't move like a child. It didn't sway or fidget. It stood perfectly still, facing the door for nearly a full minute. The night vision blurred most details, but the posture alone made something deep inside me recoil. After a long, unnatural stillness, the figure bent down, placed the pumpkin on the mat, and straightened again with slow, deliberate motion. Then it stepped backward until it disappeared into the dark. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. My mind churned with possibilities, some stranger stalking me, some disturbed kid, someone hiding in the woods, watching. But the calmness of the figure unsettled me more than anything else. The next evening, without telling anyone, I parked 2 streets away from my house, crept to the backyard, and waited. I wanted answers. I wanted to see who was doing this. For hours there was nothing. Just wind and insects, and the occasional rustle of dry leaves. Around 3 a.m., an unnatural quiet settled. Not the normal hush of night, something heavier, almost expectant. My pulse thudded painfully in my throat. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, bare, moving along the side of the house. I watched the corner, breath held. The figure emerged slowly. Small frame, too slender, head tilted at an angle that instantly disturbed me. The childlike outline moved as though its joints resisted bending, each step unnervingly smooth. In its hands it carried another black pumpkin. I crouched lower, willing myself not to make a sound. It reached the porch, placed the pumpkin down gently, and turned. Its face caught a sliver of moonlight. And that was the moment my stomach dropped. It wasn't a child. It wasn't anything close. The face looked stretched somehow, tight and expressionless, the eyes too wide and too reflective, like they belonged to something that had learned human shape, but not human emotion. It stared toward my street, not seeing me, just scanning. Then, without warning, it lifted its hand and pressed something small and rectangular to the doorframe. A device. Something electronic. I recognized it only because it glinted. A tracker. For the first time, the truth hit me with a clarity that made my skin crawl. The pumpkin was never the threat. It was the lure. A way to track me. To follow me. To approach without suspicion. Someone had used it. Someone familiar with patterns, psychology, surveillance. Someone using the figure as a courier, or disguise, or shield. When the figure left, melting back into the dark, I stayed frozen, heart hammering. At sunrise, I investigated the spot on the doorframe. The tracker was still there. Small, black, warm to the touch. And next to it, on the porch, sat another pumpkin. This one carved open at the top. And inside it, resting neatly, was a folded photograph. Of me, asleep, in my own bed. I remember the morning it started because it felt unusually heavy, as if the world had woken up slower than usual. The sky was muted, washed in a dull gray, and even the usual city sounds seemed quieter, muffled somehow. I left my apartment early, hoping to grab a coffee before the crowd thickened, but halfway down the block I stopped. There was something sitting on the curb directly across from my building. A pumpkin, black, no shine, no texture beyond a dull, matte skin that seemed to swallow the weak morning light. At first, I assumed it was the same thing I had seen weeks earlier, part of whatever sick routine someone was playing out. But this one was different. It had no dents, no marks, no smell, just stillness. Too still. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself it was just Halloween leftovers someone tossed aside. I kept walking, but even with my back turned, I felt the weight of it pressing between my shoulder blades, as if it was something alive watching me leave. That night, when I returned home, it was gone. I felt a brief relief that didn't last. My eyes kept darting around the street, scanning the alleys, the stairwells, the corners behind parked motorcycles. Nothing, but the absence of it only made my skin crawl more. I could feel a presence, not a person, but the awareness that whoever had placed it there had plans. I locked myself inside and spent the rest of the evening listening to every sound in the hallway. The next morning, exhaustion from a restless night weighed down my body, but I forced myself out the door. I paused on the last step. Another black pumpkin sat by the front gate. This one was slightly tilted, as if placed carelessly. A small cut, thin and straight, ran along its side, like someone had tested a blade against it. When I leaned closer, the faint metal smell reached my nose, so subtle I wasn't even sure it was real. I backed away quickly. I considered calling someone, but what would I say? That pumpkins were being placed near my building? It sounded ridiculous even to me. So I went to work and tried to distract myself, though I kept glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see one sitting on the sidewalk across the street. For the next 3 days, one showed up every morning, each one slightly different. One had a scrape across the top. One had an indentation like a thumb pressed hard into it. Another had a thin, curved slit, almost a smile but not quite. Each time, the smell seemed stronger, sharper, like wet iron warming in the sun. I felt watched, followed. I didn't know if the same person placed them each time or if multiple people were involved, but the placement was too precise to be random. On the 4th night, everything escalated. I left work later than usual, the office nearly empty as I finished a report. The streets were almost silent as I walked home, a kind of quiet that felt staged, wrong somehow. When I turned the corner of my block, I stopped dead. There were 3 black pumpkins lined along the sidewalk, equally spaced, each facing my building like sentinels. Their dull skins seemed to dull even the streetlights above them. My throat tightened. My breathing faltered. I scanned the street for anyone watching, anyone lurking in a doorway or behind a vehicle, but the night was still. Hollow. I crossed the street slowly, keeping my eyes on the pumpkins. I didn't want to get close, but they formed a line that forced me through them. As I stepped between the first two, the smell hit me. Thick. Metallic. Sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. I fought the urge to gag. When I reached my building, I turned for one last look. All three pumpkins were facing me. I don't know how to explain it, but the angle they sat at was too deliberate, too intentional, like they had been positioned to witness my reaction. I rushed inside and locked the door. That night, I barely slept. My ears strained for sounds in the hallway. I felt a presence outside my window, even though I lived on the third floor. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every creak sounded like footsteps. At 3:17 a.m., I heard something. A dull, soft thud from outside my door. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. Another thud, and then nothing. Minutes crawled by until I gathered enough courage to approach the peephole. The hallway was empty. Completely. But something dark sat on the floor directly below the peephole, just barely visible. My hands trembled as I unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door a sliver. A pumpkin. Black. Fresh. Placed so close to my door that I nearly hit it with the threshold. This one had a carved slit down the middle. Not a smile. A cut. A long, deliberate incision that exposed a faint glint of something inside. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I pushed it away with my foot and shut the door again, sliding every lock into place. My heart hammered so violently I felt dizzy. The next morning it was gone. I didn't leave my apartment for the entire day. I paced the rooms, checked the windows, listened to the hallway. At noon, I heard footsteps stop outside my door. I held my breath. A shadow moved under the threshold. Then silence. I waited a full minute before checking, but by then, the hallway was empty again. That evening, as the sun dipped and the shadows stretched across the buildings outside, I went to the window and opened it slightly for air. That was when I saw it. Across the street, directly facing my apartment window, someone stood inside the abandoned shop with shattered glass and a boarded door. A figure in dark clothing, still, motionless, watching, and beside their feet sat another black pumpkin. Something in me collapsed. I stumbled back from the window and felt a deep, sinking dread that told me this wasn't random. Someone had chosen me, followed me, studied me, and now they wanted me to know it. I closed the curtains and tried to steady my breathing, but my body shook uncontrollably. Hours passed. Night deepened, and when I finally worked up the courage to peek outside again, the figure was gone. But the pumpkin wasn't. It had been moved. Closer, right under my building's stairwell, with a fresh cut running down its side, still moist, glistening even in the darkness, as if whatever was inside it had been placed there moments earlier. And that metallic smell rose again, thick enough to cling to the air through the closed window, telling me without question that whoever was doing this wasn't finished. Not even close. The night that everything finally broke open is one I still replay in my mind, even though every part of me wishes I could forget it forever. It started with a sound I couldn't place, a hollow knock that echoed through my apartment as if someone had tapped directly on the inside of my skull. I was sitting on the floor at the time, leaning against the couch with the TV playing quietly, trying to distract myself from the anxiety that had been building for days. I froze. The sound came again, not loud but distinct. A rhythm too deliberate to ignore. I checked the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty. My chest tightened with a familiar dread that had been growing ever since the black pumpkins began appearing around my building. I felt hunted, observed. Someone out there knew my patterns, my routines, my fears. And that night, I sensed that whoever it was had taken another step closer. I went to the window overlooking the street. At first, everything looked normal. Parked scooters, a dim streetlight, a row of shuttered shops. Then I saw it. A black pumpkin sat directly in the center of the crosswalk, as if someone had measured the distance precisely. It faced my building, or maybe it faced me. I couldn't tell anymore. What made my stomach twist was the fact that it hadn't been there an hour earlier. Someone had placed it while I was home, while lights were on, while I was awake. The pumpkin looked smoother than the others, almost polished. Its surface reflected faint fragments of the streetlight like a dead, black eye. Even from the window, I thought I could smell the metallic tang that had haunted me for weeks. I shut the curtains immediately and backed away. The air in the room felt thick, heavier than before, as if something was pressing against the walls. I knew I couldn't stay there. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and decided I'd sleep somewhere else, anywhere else. A friend's place, a hotel, even the office would be better. But as soon as I reached the door, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. 2 words. Look outside. A shiver ran down my spine. My hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My rational brain told me not to look, to leave immediately. But fear has a strange way of pulling you toward the very thing you want to avoid. I opened the curtains just an inch. My blood turned cold. The pumpkin was gone. Not moved. Not shifted. Gone. The crosswalk was empty. A second buzz vibrated through my hand. Turn around. I spun so fast I almost slipped. My heart hammered against my ribs. The apartment was silent. Still. My breathing filled the room like a storm. I stepped deeper inside, scanning every corner. I didn't see anything at first. Then I noticed the smell. Strong. Overwhelming. Metallic with a hint of decay, as if copper and rot had fused together and seeped into the walls. My stomach lurched. I followed the scent into the living room. That's when I saw it. A black pumpkin sat on my coffee table. I don't remember dropping to my knees, but suddenly I was on the floor, breath shaking, skin crawling. I had locked my door. My windows were closed. No one had been inside. At least no one I saw. But the pumpkin, it was there. A perfect sphere of matte darkness, too large to ignore, too heavy looking for someone to have carried in without making noise. For a minute, all I could do was stare. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. I crawled forward slowly, as if approaching a sleeping animal. When I reached the table, I forced myself to look closer. A slit ran down the front, thin but deep, fresh enough that something glistened along the edge. My eyes stung from the smell. Then the phone buzzed again. Don't touch it. I jumped back so hard I hit the bookshelf behind me. My breath came out in sharp bursts. My hands shook uncontrollably. Whoever was texting me wasn't guessing. They were watching in real time. They knew exactly where I was, what I was doing, how I reacted. I scanned the windows, the corners of the ceiling, the small gaps under furniture. I felt exposed, as if my apartment had become a glass box. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to get away. I ran down the stairs instead of taking the elevator. The stairwell echoed each step as if amplifying my panic. When I reached the bottom floor, I stopped dead. There was another black pumpkin on the ground, directly in front of the exit door. This one was small, about the size of a child's football. Its top was cracked open slightly, just enough to reveal a darkness inside that made my skin crawl. The smell hit me immediately, thick and choking. Whoever had placed it there knew I'd have to pass it to get out. I wanted to kick it aside, but fear held me back. I stepped around it carefully, keeping my eyes on the exit door. The metal bar felt cold against my hand as I pushed it open and escaped into the night air. Outside, the street was silent. Too silent. Even the usual dogs weren't barking. I walked quickly toward the main road, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. When I reached the first intersection, I slowed down. I told myself I was safe, that the person stalking me wouldn't follow me into busier areas. But then I saw them, a figure standing beneath a flickering streetlight on the opposite side of the road. Tall, still, wearing dark clothing from head to toe. At first, I thought they were just someone waiting for a ride. Then I noticed the object at their feet, a black pumpkin, large, perfectly round. Facing me, my legs went numb. I couldn't breathe. The figure didn't move. They didn't shift or tilt their head. They just stood there as though carved from the same darkness as the pumpkin beside them. I turned and walked faster, not running, but close. My chest ached from the pressure inside it. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if the figure was following. I headed toward the only place that felt remotely safe at that hour, a nearby petrol station with bright lights and security cameras. I reached the edge of the forecourt before I finally gathered the courage to look behind me. The street was empty. No figure. No pumpkin. Nothing. I stayed at the station until sunrise, sitting near the convenience shop window, pretending to browse my phone while my mind spiraled. When the morning light finally stretched across the pavement, I felt a small measure of relief. I returned home cautiously, half expecting to find more black pumpkins littering the entrance. There were none. The building looked normal. Quiet. Still. Too normal for what I had experienced. But when I reached my apartment door, I stopped. A thin smear of something dark streaked across the bottom of the frame, as if someone had dragged a finger dipped in something metallic along the wood. And taped above the handle was a small piece of paper. 2 words, written in shaky, uneven strokes. Next one's yours. My hands went cold, because I realized something then. All the pumpkins before this had been warnings. But the next one was meant to be a message carved from something far more terrifying than pumpkin flesh. And whoever had been following me wasn't finished. Not even close.